Hi everybody, welcome back to Project Happy Home. For those of you who are new here, I'm Tanya, a doctor, lawyer, turned homeschool mom of 3 kids ages 11, 8, and 6. In today's video, I'm collaborating with my friend Laura over at Ticket to Learning and Katie in Life in the Mundane, and we are bringing you a video about books, particularly for struggling or reluctant readers, in honor of National Book Lovers Day. If you are interested in videos about secular homeschooling, raising a child with ADHD, and living a more essentialist lifestyle in general, you've come to the right place, so be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. So when you have a struggling or reluctant reader, there's lots of different categories of books that you can look into, and I'm going to show you some of our favorites in those categories and just talk about them randomly. But Laura's video is actually incredibly well organized and structured, so definitely check that out. And I'm sure Katie's video is great too, I just haven't had a chance to see it yet. So, one of the things I would suggest for a struggling reader is baby books. And by baby books, I mean like some of the first books that you would read to your infants and children, like this Wild Animal Baby magazine. So, the reading is definitely designed for adult reading, but by the same token, the reading is very swift and quick and informative. And the way I would suggest utilizing things like this is by letting them read to their younger siblings if they have them. Another way of doing it is letting them play school if you have an only child. Another thing I wanted to share are these books from Usborne. Now, these are their very first reading books and first reading book. The very first reading books are these paired readers. Now, you can get these from other companies as well. But basically, they'll have text on every page that is for the adult to read or the strong reader to read, and then the new and emergent reader to read as well. So if you have a new reader or struggling reader, this is a nice way to get a more meaty story while still making them feel comfortable with what they have to read. So for example, here I would read this and my new reader would read the words that are bigger.
Alright, you guys, the audio on the rest of the file is just too corrupted, so I'm going to do a voiceover for the rest of the video. I appreciate your understanding. I start off by talking about classics like Owl at Home, Frog and Toad, Winnie the Pooh. A lot of these original classics are a really good starting point for a struggling reader. One, they're familiar with the stories. Two, they have a really heavy picture-to-text ratio, so it's not very overwhelming to read one story at a time. Another thing I really like about these original classics is that they are not dumbed down. They are written to all ages. I find myself laughing out loud as an adult when I read them. So they're a good choice for your struggling readers, particularly if they're a little bit older and feel like they're too old for books that look like this. If you have a struggling reader, starting with a series like Nate the Great is good because, again, a really heavy picture-to-text ratio, and they're amusing, the story continues, the student can build a relationship with the character and want to read the next book and the next book and so on and so forth. I wanted to mention Goonie Bird Green. It is a great little novel. It has lots of pictures in it, but also a lot of text, so it's more of a classic chapter book, but it's very short and sweet. It teaches a lot of literary elements as the character themselves tell stories to show her class like how good storytelling happens. So don't feel like just because the book is simpler or shorter that you can't get a lot of meat out of it and teach kids a lot of things about plot and character development. Another series I'd recommend is this series by Usborne. I'm not sure what they call these. They are the Illustrated Classics series. So you have Illustrated Fables, you have Illustrated Hans Christian Andersen and the Grimm's Brothers, you'll have princess stories, etc. It's a really nice little hardback book. It's easy for the kids to hold. They make great bedtime readers because all the stories form a cohesive collection of stories, but each one isn't very long. The illustrations are beautiful and very engaging, so my kids loved using these as their bedtime readers. Another group of books that I would suggest are books having short chapters. Now, for example, The Wild Robot by Peter Brown is actually a pretty long book, but each of the chapters is very, very short. Having a book with short chapters encourages the student and motivates the student because they can read 10 or 20 chapters in an evening and feel the accomplishment that comes along with that. It's a psychological block, right, to have an incredibly long chapter. So if you can see here in The Wild Robot, that chapter is only about 4 pages long, and that's how it continues. And of course, I could not do this video without mentioning graphic novels. El Defo is a great example of a graphic novel that has brilliant character development and a great plot. It is the winner of the Newbery Award, and you shouldn't rule out graphic novels just because they're graphic novels. They can really flesh out a story as well as any traditional chapter book. Another graphic novel that we've really enjoyed this year has been Trickster, and it's a collection of Native American mythology, illustrated by all different graphic artists. So it's a really fun book to explore with your kid. I learned a lot of Native American mythology from this. Graphic novels are not just for little kids. If you have a reluctant or struggling reader, really open yourself to the idea that they count, that they are just as good as chapter books. If you have a child who's into the gross and the gory, the horrible series is a great place to start for them. The books are text heavy, but there are a lot of illustrations throughout, and they have different series. So they have, for example, horrible histories, horrible science, horrible math. I believe they have horrible geography as well. And they're just really fun books. They're not designed to be read straight through. If your child doesn't want to, you can really read section by section, or they can flip through and read an interesting portion of history about that era. Uh, each section is very short, and there's usually some really fun factoid that you probably haven't heard of that they can teach you. Some of these books I use for my students to teach me something, and I'll give them the book and say, find something that you don't think I know and surprise me. And that's another good way of getting them to read more than you might expect. Another suggestion is to grab a poetry book. Now, not just any poetry book, not an anthology that's super thick, but a short poetry book, like an illustrated picture book of one particular poem. So this is Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening. Your student probably has heard you read this poem. They have familiarity with the rhyme and rhythm and meter of this poem, and there is a comfort to that, to being able to read words that you already anticipate. So I definitely suggest common poetry, poetry that they know, as a way of practicing their skills with bigger and more complicated words. Factoid books are another great option, particularly if you have a reluctant reader, because everything is bite-sized and you don't have to go in a particular order. They can really flip through the book until they get to a place that they find interesting, or a factoid that they find interesting. Again, you can do the same trick I mentioned before. Go ahead and read for 15 minutes and find me something that you think I don't know and teach it to me. I think kids love teaching you things you don't know. They love seeing you say, wow, really? Sometimes I don't believe my kids when they teach me new things, and they love that even more, because then I look it up and they're right and they know they're right. And all of that cements that knowledge and enthusiasm for books as a source of, fascination and information, and just as doorways to the world. Another way to motivate reading is with an activity book. So for example, this is a landmark book where you build paper models of the landmarks. But if you can see at the top of all the pages, they have a section of text that gives you information about the landmark that you're building. And what I typically do with books like this is they have to read the section at the top, teach me about it or tell me about it, and then we go ahead and do the activity. And that just incentivizes the reading. There are a lot of graphic novels now that explore nonfiction topics. For example, this is Chester Comics that explores history. It's, published quite a while ago, so be aware of some colonialism issues. But there's so many graphic novels out there now for nonfiction topics like science and history in particular. So definitely keep an eye out for those. These are the Revolutionary War and war books that I presented in a recent video. They are sold by timberdoodle.com, and they are a great addition to any American history curriculum. I cannot emphasize the importance of illustrations when it comes to reluctant readers. It is definitely motivational to see the picture, to have that entertainment factor. So this is an illustrated edition of Wind in the Willows that was on sale recently. Whenever you see those, snatch them up. Similar to what I was saying before about poetry books, practicing reading with nursery rhymes is a great way to have fun with it, to sing out your reading, to rhyme your reading, to feel the comfort of something you already know by heart and see those words materialize on the page in front of you. This is actually the first volume of the Book House series, which is old, and so you have to be aware of some bias there. But finding books like this with great illustrations allows your student to practice in like a comforting environment. These are the classics by M. Sasek, I believe is how you pronounce his name. So this is Rome. This is The Way to the Moon. This is London, etc. Again, super picture heavy, but really good information, lots of vocab and language about the place. This is a box set of Shakespeare that I picked up, and these are Shakespeare Retellings in a shorter format. I used to be the parent who would say I would never let my kids read like the watered down version of classics and books, but for Shakespeare in particular, I find it really useful. So you can see lots of cartoon-like illustrations here. They get the story. They're more prepared when they read it in the original. So definitely consider that. Your child doesn't have to read it in the original first, especially when they're developing their reading skill. And there's George. He's our new Vizsla puppy. Another category that I would recommend is activity books. So one of my children is very interested in sewing. A book like this gives them an opportunity to learn a new skill, but also to practice their reading, because very practically speaking, they have to read through the instructions. And getting your kids to the point where they understand that reading is not just a class in their homeschool day, but really like a functional way to learn anything they want in the world is a great thing for them. So if you can get them to the point where they realize that reading isn't a chore, reading is really a gateway, that's what we're aiming for. Poetry books, again, you don't have to read just the classics. You can read poems by, the former poet laureate for children, Jack Prelutsky. You can read Shel Silverstein. These poems make my kids laugh hysterically. They will pick them up on their own and read them to each other. Even my youngest, who before she knew how to read, she would pick up some of these poem books and want her elder siblings to read her favorite poems. Lots of illustrations, lots of room for laughter and connection over books. And that's what we're really seeking, right, with our struggling readers, is that connection. So anything that can, give you that shared experience is a good thing. Another thing I would suggest are coffee table books. Now, coffee table books are interesting because in general they are written to an adult. They are written with adult vocabulary. They are not written to a child, but they are short and concise sections. They are very topic driven. So if you have a child who's interested in mythology, if you have a child who's interested in flowers like here, that's a great way to connect with a book over your child and to let them learn on their own and practice stretching their skills. Don't rule out public school reading textbooks. So for example, this one's by Harcourt, and they have a lot of different types of literature within the textbook, which is the first benefit. So you'll have poems, you'll have plays, you'll have full picture books in there. So it's a great value, if nothing else. I generally pick these up from thrift stores when I find them because I think they're nice nighttime readers. We don't really use them as curriculum, but they're great books to practice reading. They're usually very on point for grade level, and it gives you an idea of, different types of literature with your kid. They also have discussion questions in there and projects if you want to do them. I think they get a bad rap in the homeschool community. I hope that was helpful. Don't forget to check out Laura's and Katie's videos. I will link them in the description box down below. I'm sorry for my audio difficulties, but I hope the voiceover worked. As always, I know your time is valuable. I really appreciate that you spent some of it with me, and I hope you have a great day.